Hello guys, welcome to my channel. The less is more. So today we will discuss an editorial from the Hindu, and it is an important topic from the UPSC's point of view and the mains perspective as well. Okay, so let's start the editorial. The topic of the editorial is the Finance Commission, which is more important due to its implications on center as well as state, because it involves the devolution of fund from the center to the states, devolution of grants. Okay, so and it is constituted for 5 years, okay, by president. So let's start the editorial. The title of the editorial is Charting the Path for the 16th Finance Commission. The 16th Finance Commission is due to be set up shortly. Many critical changes have taken place since the constitution of the 15th Finance Commission in November 2017, that includes COVID-19 and the subsequent geopolitical challenges. The combined government debt GDP ratio had also shot up close to 90% at the end of 2020-21. Many states show large fiscal imbalance too. The vertical and horizontal dimensions. The 14th Finance Commission has raised the share of states in the divisible pool of central taxes to 42% from 32%. This was revised to 41% when the number of states in India was reduced to 28. However, the center could manage the situation because of the withdrawal of Planning Commission grants, as the Planning Commission was abolished. There may not be strong case for recommending any further increase in the state share of central taxes in view of the center's large fiscal imbalances. Alongside, a re-examination of the role of non-shareable cesses and surcharges is required. So, what is required? Re-examination of role of non-shareable cess and surcharge. Okay. During 2021 to 23-24, the effective share of states in the center's gross tax revenues averaged close to 31%, which was significantly lower than the corresponding share, nearly 35%, during 15-16 to 19-20. This was due to inordinate increase in the share of cess and surcharges to 18.5% of the center's GTR during 2021 to 23-24, from 12.8% during 15-16 to 19-20. So 18.5% share owed to center for cesses and surcharges, which are non-shareable to states. So increase to 18.5% from 12.8%. One option. This heavy reliance on cess and surcharges requires scrutiny by the 16th Finance Commission. One option is to freeze the share of cess and surcharge to some base number. What can be done? Freeze the share of cess and surcharge to some base number. In the period under the 13th Finance Commission, this share was just 9.6%. Perhaps a 10% upper limit of the share of cesses and surcharge as a percentage of center's GTR may be recommended. To make it beating, the share of states must be increased if the proportion crosses 10%. Thus, there will be one proportion, say 42%, if cess and surcharge exceed 10%, and another share of 41% if they are 10% or below. The Finance Commission, with the help of the latest data, an issue of concern in recent years has been the poor performance of the goods and service tax and the consequent decline in total divisible pool. Fortunately, this is not an issue now. GST collection have maintained good buoyancy in the last 2 years. GST still needs restructuring to make it a good and simple tax. The share of individual states in the center's divisible pool of taxes is determined by a set of indicators that includes population, per capita income, area, and incentive related to factors such as forest cover, and demographic change. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 6: population, per capita income, area, forest cover and demographic change. Population, area, per capita income, fourth forest cover, and fifth demographic change. In the case of per capita income, it is the distance of a state's per capita income from a benchmark, usually kept at the average per capita income of the top 3 states, that is used as determining factor. The average of top 3 states is the higher benchmark for states per capita income. This distance criterion implies relatively larger share for relatively lower income states. This is a distance criterion and implies what? Relatively larger share. Okay. So at present it has the highest weight of 45%. It had an even higher weight previously. Many of the richer states have argued for lowering of the weight given to this criterion. However, due to attention needs to be paid to the needs of the lower income states, the states are expected to provide a relatively larger share of demographic dividend to India in future, provided attention is paid to the educational and health needs of their population. It may be useful to freeze the weight to distance criterion at the current level or even reduce it to 40%. So, these low income states, the share of the low income states should be reduced to 40%, this criterion, because it is higher than 45% and previously even higher than that. But some upward adjustment in the resource transfer to the poorer states may be done through grants. In fact, equalization of the provision of education and health services should be prioritized in the overall scheme of resource transfer. Instead of using a large number of tax devolution criteria, the transfer of resources to individual states may be guided by the equalization principle, using a limited number of criteria such as population, area and distance, supplemented by a suitable scheme of grants. Here the author is saying that the reduction of the number of criteria to limited number, that is almost 3, and for population, area and distance for this low per capita income, and not for demographic change and the forest cover, and the other resource can be supplemented through grants. The equalization principle is consistent with both equity and efficiency. Here this is a new word that you can note down, that is equalization principle for Finance Commission, 16th Finance Commission. It is used in federations such as Canada and Australia. The basic consideration of reflecting needs, cost of providing services and equity consideration can all be reflected through these 3 criteria, provided there is more fine tuning. Now, what are the recommendations? The debt GDP ratio for the combined account of central and state governments had peaked at 89.8% in 2021, of which the centre's debt GDP ratio, excluding any on lending to the states, amounted to 58.7%, almost 60%, and that of states was 31%. Okay, so almost 90% debt to GDP ratio. While these numbers have begun coming down, these are still considerably above the corresponding fiscal responsibility and budget management norms of 40% and 20%. Right now, the center's debt to GDP ratio is 60%, which should be at 40% according to FRBM Act, and the state's share of debt to GDP ratio is 31%, which should be at 20%. As in 2018 amendment. In 2021, the center's fiscal deficit had shot up to 9.2% of GDP and that of states to 4.1%. So here let's talk about the fiscal deficit, which shot up to 9.2%, which it is very huge, but due to some circumstances such as COVID-19 and the geopolitical imbalance, the fiscal deficit of the center rose to 9.2%. And the state's fiscal deficit rose to 4.1%. In view of the large departures of the debt and fiscal deficit to GDP ratios from their corresponding norms and the reduction of the state's debt GDP target to 20%, the 2018 amendment to the center's FRBM needs to be re-examined. This was also recommended by the 15th Finance Commission. So here what is the recommendation of re-examination of the FRBM Act, which sets the target for debt to GDP ratio and fiscal deficit. Okay, and the present statistics has risen from all the norms that have been decided through 2018 amendment. So there is a need for re-examination of FRBM Act. The 12th Finance Commission had recommended a target of 28%, consistent with an underlying nominal GDP growth of 12%. It is also clear that the adjustment needed for the central government is larger than that for state governments. At the same time, a few state governments appear to have relatively larger debt and fiscal deficit numbers relative to their GSDPs. In this context, two concerns appear. These relate to proliferation of subsidies and the reintroduction of the old pension scheme in states without a clear identification of the sources of financing and the resultant fiscal burdens. Often such subsidies are sought to be financed by raising the fiscal deficit. So here the author is saying that the two concerns are need to be re-examined again, that is the proliferation of subsidies and that too without any clear identification of financing the same resources, and the reintroduction of the old pension scheme, okay, in the states. So right now these states do not have enough resources to again reintroduce these old pension schemes. So the author is recommending here to do not go in a hurry for reintroduction of the old scheme and the proliferation of subsidies without deciding on the finance for those resources and the resultant fiscal burdens. Often such subsidies are sought to be financed by raising the fiscal deficit. So here for financing subsidies and old pension schemes through fiscal deficit is much more dangerous for the emerging economy such as India. Reforms worth pursuing. One innovation which may be relevant in this context is to set up loan council. Here you can use this in your answer, that recommending a loan council as recommended by the 12th Finance Commission. See guys, you have to substantiate your answer with these kind of facts, okay, so that it should not be like your innovations, but you are saying on the basis of the government resources. This independent body should oversee the loan magnitudes and profiles of the central and state governments. The 16th Finance Commission should examine the subject of non-merit subsidies in detail. However, exclusion of unjustified subsidies while determining grants may cause the Finance Commission to be caught in political crossfire. At the same time, one cannot afford to be relaxed with respect to subsidies and fiscal deficit. The Finance Commission should be strict about states maintaining fiscal deficit within limits. It should provide carrots to states maintaining fiscal deficit, for example, including fiscal performance as a criterion in horizontal distribution, and sticks for those that exceed fiscal deficit limits by suitably acting on the extent of borrowing allowed. So, in the conclusion, the author has recommended for the strict norms to be followed by the state government to maintain the fiscal deficit, and if they are exceeding the same limit, then there should be actions on the extent of borrowing allowed for the state, okay, so that the states can maintain the fiscal deficit. So, here the new thing that you can use is there is a need for re-examination of non-merit subsidies. Non-merit subsidies, so those kind of subsidies which do not create any substantive capital formation, as we have seen in the economy that fixed capital formation can bring the employment opportunities and create and leads to multiplier effect for the whole economy, whereas the subsidies do not create any effective infrastructure or the investment, which leads to just creation of consumption goods, which is not good for the economy. So this was for today. It is about the 16th Finance Commission, yet to be set up, but it is due in these years and will be set up by the president shortly, okay. And so this was for today, and the 5 new words that I would like to recommend and for my use, that is, the first is fiscal imbalance, geopolitical challenges, equalization principle, fourth is devolution criteria, and the fifth is consistent. So these are the new 5 words that I would like to use in my conversations or the writings. I would also recommend you to write down the same in the comment section, okay. So till then, bye bye, signing off for the day.